Hi, this is Dave, and I want to tell you a story from my own personal background today. There was a time in my life when I was young and cocky and a bit full of myself, when I had one of the most humbling experiences of my life, and I learned a lesson that has stuck with me for decades. Here's the story. I'd been the number one salesperson in the nation for a company, my first full-time professional sales job. And, honestly, I had it made. I had a good salary. I had good benefits. I had a company car. I had the potential to earn a bonus every year, and I had the respect of my employer. I had the respect of my colleagues. Not bad. But the long-term opportunities were limited, and I decided to move on to a job that was 180 degrees different. I took a position selling surgical staplers to hospitals. Now, it was a leap from the secure job that I had to one that paid straight commission. It required you to buy your own samples and your own literature for the company, and provided only 6 months of a draw to begin. So from one perspective, it did not look like a match made in heaven. It involved selling a technical product to surgeons in hospitals, and I had no medical experience. And my talents and gifts were on the opposite end of the scale. Instead of math and science, I was good at and interested in literature and social studies. In addition, as a child growing up in a family of 6 boys, my father had a heart condition, which landed him in the hospital a number of times. And as a result, I had an aversion to hospitals. I didn't like them. I don't want to be in them. But I was cocky, and I was filled with the success of my previous job, and I was sure that I could make this work also. And it wasn't hasty. I was thoughtful. I looked at the amount of existing business in the territory I was going to get, and I determined that if I could double the business within 6 months, I know, but I was assured that was doable. Then I'd be back making about what I was used to earning, and then, as I increased the business, my income and lifestyle would show the difference. Well, it all sounded attractive, and I left my old job, and I arrived in New York City for 6 weeks of intensive training on the new one. And during the time I was there, my district manager, that's the person who hired me, moved on to another job and was replaced. And when I arrived home after the training, my new manager was anxious to meet with me. In our first meeting, before I even had a chance to begin working, he informed me that he had revised the sales territory. The territory that I thought I had, the one for which I was hired, was not the one I was going to get. Instead, I was going to receive just a fraction of that territory. The territory that I was going to now get only contained about 1/3 of the existing business as the previous one. And this change meant my plans for making a living were shot. It now became an impossible task. Instead of having to double the business to be back where I was, I had to multiply it by a factor of 6 in 6 months just to make ends meet. It just wasn't going to happen. I was upset and angry. I thought, how could they do that to me? I immediately began to look for another job. I was determined to quickly leave this unethical, uncaring company. And things got worse. As I interviewed several companies, I discovered that they saw me as the problem. Instead of understanding what the company had done to me, they thought I was an opportunist who was looking for an easy way out. It became clear that no one else was going to hire me. And I grew more and more angry and more bitter. And in addition, I had very little success selling those staplers. And after 6 months, my temporary draw came to an end. I owed the company over $10,000, was making almost nothing, and I had no prospects for another job. I had a family to support, and I was caught in a miserable place. I felt squeezed between the proverbial rock and the hard place. I was the victim of a dirty deal, and I couldn't make this work, and I couldn't find another job. Then out of the blue one day, and I don't remember the incident, I just remember that I had an inspiration. I honestly don't remember if it was an experience or someone talked to me. Regardless, it suddenly dawned on me that the problem was me. It really was me. Yes, the company had treated me poorly. Yes, they had been unethical and uncaring, but the product was still exciting and the opportunity was still great. The real problem was my attitude. My bitterness and my anger were getting in the way of everything. And it occurred to me that I was responsible for my own behavior, my own thoughts, and my own attitude. When I had the realization that the problem was me, honestly, I felt like 1,000 pounds had been lifted from my shoulders. If the problem was me, then I could change. If the problem was somebody else, then I was a victim and I was powerless to do anything about it. What an exhilarating realization. So since the problem was me, I had to work on me. And so I began very methodically to work on my attitude. I decided to take control of my thoughts. Here's what I did. I got a pack of 3x5 cards and I wrote down on each card, one at a time, I wrote down certain positive and uplifting quotes and sayings that I could find. I looked up a lot of Bible verses, for example. You know, if God is for you, who could be against you? That's one. Another, all things for which you pray and ask, believe that you have received them, and they shall be granted you. Wow. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Wow, you see what I mean? It took a while. But eventually, I came up with, 30 or 40 of those cards. Now, at the time, I was living in Brighton, which is outside of Detroit, and my territory was in the city. So I would drive about 45 minutes every day from my home into my sales territory. And I began to use that time to change my thinking. Here's what I did. I wouldn't today recommend this, not this specific thing. But as I drove into my territory every day along I-96 into Detroit, I held those cards in my hand on the steering wheel, and I flipped them over and over, read them to myself, flipped them over, read the next one, flipped it over, and so on. And I began to read those cards every chance I had, continually and methodically putting positive thoughts into my head. And slowly, I began to do away with my bitter attitude, and I replaced it with an attitude of hope and expectation. My results began to change as well. You know, things began to go better. Seriously, this is not an exaggeration. 6 months later, I had paid off the debt to the company, and I was making more money than I thought was possible. The job had become more fun, was more financially rewarding, and more fulfilling than anything I ever expected. I began to get better results. My performance was a result of my actions. My actions emerged out of my attitude, and my attitude changed as I began to think differently. I began to think differently because I intentionally and methodically pushed powerful words of Scripture and powerful words of positive sayings into my head. And I did that because I finally realized that my actions and my attitudes were my responsibility. You know, I learned one of the greatest life lessons ever, that your circumstances and your results are your responsibility, and that you can choose your thoughts and your attitudes. And by doing that, you can impact your actions and your results. Wow. The turning point for me occurred at the moment when I accepted personal responsibility for my circumstances. The lesson was clear. When there is no acceptance of personal responsibility, there's little hope for positive change. Where there is personal responsibility, the future holds unlimited potential. Let me repeat that. I think that's really a powerful thing. Where there is no acceptance of personal responsibility, there is little hope for positive change. Where there is a personal responsibility, the future holds unlimited potential. Now, over the 25 plus years that I've been working with sales forces and speaking to groups of business people, I routinely mention that principle in my presentations. And, I always feel just a little bit embarrassed Not that I'm embarrassed by my failure and the lesson I learned, but I'm embarrassed to even be talking about a principle which is so basic and so fundamental to growth and development. Doesn't everyone know this? Unfortunately, the answer is no. The vast majority of human beings do not understand these fundamental principles, that you are responsible for your own results, and you can change your thoughts, you can change your attitudes, and you can change your actions. That seems so basic and so common sense, yet I'm constantly amazed by how few people actually get it. Over and over in my work in developing salespeople and sales forces and their managers, I'm struck by how many people fail to accept responsibility for their own success or their lack of it. It's far more popular to be a victim. We have all shook our heads sadly over some newspaper account of someone who commits some act of irresponsibility and then successfully sues someone else. In our litigious world, being a victim often pays. That's just an unfortunate consequence of an unhealthy belief. As long as we view ourselves as victims, we are unable to change ourselves or our circumstances and achieve better results. It's not our fault that we're not doing better. We tell ourselves, someone else caused it. And because it's someone else's doing, the power to fix it and make it better is with someone else. We're powerless to fix it. And while few people admit it or even realize it consciously, this victim attitude, which is the opposite of personal responsibility, is very common, and it's embraced to some degree by most of us. My wife is a crisis counselor. Now, one of the biggest eye-openers for her occurred when she realized that she was counseling the same people over and over again. You'd think, as she did, that a crisis would be an isolated event. Not so. Many of her clients found themselves lurching from one crisis to another. Why? Well, because they didn't make the changes in their behavior and character that got them into the crisis in the first place. At some deep level, they saw themselves as victims, not personally responsible for their own character, their own behavior, and the consequences that behavior brings. Where there is no sense of personal responsibility, there is little hope for positive change. Now, I see thousands of salespeople who blame someone else for their lack of results. The price is too high, the customers are unreasonable, the boss doesn't understand. I see executives and small business people who blame the market, their employees, their lack of resources. I see individuals in all walks of life who see themselves as victims, powerless to change their circumstances. I see entire people groups who believe so deeply that they are victims that they look for solutions in every other place other than themselves. Instead of accepting personal responsibility, they shout, racism or this ism or that ism, blaming somebody else instead of taking charge themselves. As long as they believe that they're powerless to change their circumstances, they are stuck in the role of a victim. They believe that the world or some important part of it has conspired against them, and there is nothing they can do about it except complain. However, once they accept the responsibility for their own actions, they rise out of the world of victimization and they become a new creature. The Apostle Paul did say, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Once you get it, really, truly get it, not just on an intellectual level, but at a deep, emotional, even spiritual level, your world changes. You no longer blame your circumstances on other people, and you see the opportunity in every challenge and situation. The world unfolds in front of you and becomes a place of unlimited opportunity when you get it. Okay? That's it. We're done. Bye-bye.